All right, so get ready to explore some really intriguing ideas about
Yeah.
light knowledge
Yeah.
and the limitations of words.
Cool.
We're diving into the work of a 20th century theosophical author, and trust me, this stuff gets pretty deep.
What we're looking at are esoteric concepts, meaning ideas that aren't widely known or accepted.
Right.
They challenge us to think outside the box about spirituality,
Okay.
the power of thought, and how we connect to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And one of the coolest concepts we'll be unpacking is this idea of an inner light. It's
Right.
not just a metaphor.
Okay.
This author suggests that each person literally has an inner light, and its brilliance reflects their spiritual progress.
It's like imagine a light within each of us
Hmm.
that grows brighter as we evolve spiritually.
Okay.
The author describes it as a reflection of the refinement of our various vehicles,
Okay.
meaning our physical, etheric,
Hmm.
astral, and mental bodies.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe back up a sec. For those of us who aren't totally fluent in theosophy,
Okay.
what exactly are these etheric and astral bodies?
Good point.
Yeah.
Think of them as layers of your being that exist beyond the physical body.
Okay.
The etheric body is like an energy blueprint,
Okay.
while the astral body is associated with emotions and desires.
Gotcha.
And as we work on ourselves, purifying these different layers, our inner light naturally becomes more radiant.
So it's like our actions and intentions directly impact how brightly our inner light shines. That's a pretty powerful concept to consider.
Absolutely. The author even goes on to say that people can potentially perceive these different levels of light.
Okay.
Physical light, etheric light, and soul light.
Wow.
He even mentions seeing a dark center within the radiant sun,
Uh-huh.
which could indicate the start of a spiritual path for some.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Does that mean everyone on a spiritual path is seeing these lights all the time?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It's not about having visions. It's more about the inner work we do to purify those different layers of our being.
Right.
Seeing light might be a phenomenal experience for some,
Sure.
but it's not a requirement for spiritual progress.
That's good to know. I was starting to worry I was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
But if it's more about inner transformation, then what role does knowledge play in this? Especially when it comes to these complex, esoteric ideas.
That's where the limitations of words come in.
Okay.
This author argues that language is inherently limited in expressing profound spiritual truths.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right.
It's like trying to explain what it feels like to fall in love.
Right.
Words can only capture so much.
Exactly. The author uses this striking image.
Okay.
He calls books prison houses of ideas.
Ah.
Words can box us in, limiting our understanding.
So if words can't fully convey these truths, how are we supposed to understand them? How do we break out of these prison houses?
The author suggests we might move towards something beyond language, telepathic communication, intuitive understanding.
Right.
Imagine a world where we could directly perceive each other's thoughts and feelings.
That's a mind-blowing thought, but for now, it seems like we're stuck trying to grapple with these concepts using our limited language.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much we're missing, right?
It certainly does. It raises the question,
Yeah.
are there other ways to access this deeper knowledge beyond the constraints of words?
That's a great question. And speaking of accessing knowledge, this author dives into some fascinating concepts about masters and disciples.
Okay.
Who are these masters, and how do they fit into this whole picture of spiritual evolution?
The masters are described as highly evolved beings,
Okay.
guides for humanity. They might be physical or non-physical.
Okay.
The point is they're further along the path working behind the scenes to help us evolve.
So are they like spiritual teachers? Do they have students or disciples?
Exactly. Disciples are those who are drawn to learn from the masters and help bring their teachings into the world. It's like a spiritual lineage passing down wisdom and energy.
It sounds like a pretty exclusive club.
Hmm.
How do you even get to be a disciple?
It's not about joining a club.
Right.
The author mentions this new group of world servers,
Okay.
a group of individuals dedicated to serving humanity and helping to unfold a divine plan.
Okay.
It's not a formal organization. They're connected through their work and a shared inclusiveness of the note they sound.
So it's more about aligning with a certain vibration or intention, less about outward actions and more about inner resonance.
Precisely. They recognize each other by the quality of their work,
Right.
the way they show up in the world,
Okay.
and this divine plan they're working towards.
Yeah.
Well, that's a whole other rabbit hole to explore.
Right. You've piqued my curiosity.
Okay.
What exactly is this divine plan? Is it like a blueprint for humanity's future?
The author suggests it aims for something pretty profound.
Okay.
A subjective synthesis of humanity and a telepathic interplay that transcends time.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah. Annihilating time? That's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Do we even have free will if there's a set plan?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And one we'll need to keep in mind as we dig deeper into these concepts.
Okay.
But for now,
Yeah.
what are your initial thoughts on this idea of a divine plan? Does it feel empowering or restrictive?
Honestly, it's a little bit of both.
Right.
Exciting to think there's a bigger purpose, but also a bit daunting to think it might all be mapped out.
I agree. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But I think the key is not to get too caught up in the specifics.
Mhm.
The author himself says we can't fully comprehend the scope of the plan.
So maybe it's more about trusting the process, even if we don't understand all the details.
That's a great way to put it. It's about aligning ourselves with the direction of the plan,
Hmm.
even if we can't see the whole map.
Right.
Which, by the way, brings us to some pretty fascinating predictions the author makes about the future.
Okay, so we've got this idea of a divine plan unfolding, guided by these mysterious masters.
Right.
But how does it actually work? Do they just beam messages into people's minds?
It's a bit more subtle than that.
Oh, okay.
The author talks about the hierarchy working through inspiration,
Okay.
planting seeds of ideas in the minds of thinkers and artists.
So it's less about direct intervention and more about influencing the collective consciousness.
Exactly. It's about guiding humanity's evolution
Right.
towards a higher state of awareness.
Hmm.
Imagine them as master gardeners,
Okay.
tending to the garden of human consciousness.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And speaking of evolution,
Right.
this author makes some pretty intriguing predictions about the future. He mentions the possibility of a great initiate appearing to continue these esoteric teachings sometime in the next century.
He does.
Okay.
And he also predicts a scientific discovery relating to light and thought happening at the end of the 20th century or the beginning of the 21st century.
Wait a second. It's 2025 right now.
Right.
That means this discovery should have already happened.
That's right. Wow.
And if you think about it, we've seen so many advancements in fields like neuroscience, quantum physics, and biophotonics recently. Maybe this discovery is already unfolding, but we haven't fully grasped its significance yet.
That's a pretty mind-blowing thought.
Yeah.
What other predictions does he make about the future?
Well, he talks about humanity moving towards a new age characterized by joy,
Okay.
strength, and a deeper understanding of spiritual truths.
That sounds pretty optimistic,
Right.
especially considering all the challenges we're facing in the world right now.
It's definitely a hopeful vision,
Yeah.
but he also acknowledges that change can be messy.
Oh.
He talks about cycles and transitions and how destruction parallels the impact of the descending spirit upon opposing matter.
That makes me think of all the social and political upheaval happening right now.
Right.
Maybe it's all part of this transition to a more spiritually aware state of being.
It's definitely a possibility.
Mm.
He even mentions that the future will shine with an added glory, but that there will be difficulties and problems incident to world adjustment and the new relationships between the spiritual man and his material environment.
So a bumpy ride,
Yeah.
but ultimately heading towards something brighter. And
Yeah.
speaking of different paths,
Right.
he also distinguishes between the paths of the occultist and the mystic.
Uh-huh.
How do those paths differ?
The occultist is focused on knowledge and understanding of the universal laws.
Okay.
Think of them as the scientists of the spiritual world, delving into the intricacies of the cosmos.
Okay, so the occultist is all about the head.
Yeah.
What about the mystic?
The mystic emphasizes love and direct experience of the divine. It's about cultivating a deep connection with the source of all being.
So the mystic is more about the heart. So which path is the right one?
The author argues both paths lead to the same goal,
Right.
realizing one's divine nature.
Right.
They're just different approaches to the same summit.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's like climbing a mountain. You can take different routes, but the peak is the same.
Right.
What about you? Do you feel more drawn to one path or the other?
Personally, I find both paths fascinating.
Okay.
I'm drawn to the intellectual exploration of the occultist,
Right.
but also the heart-centered approach of the mystic.
Okay.
The author actually suggests the ideal is integrating both knowledge and love, because true knowledge is intelligent love.
That makes so much sense. It's
Yeah.
not about choosing one or the other,
Right.
but finding a balance between the head and the heart.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got all this theoretical stuff, but let's bring it back to 2025.
Okay.
If we look at all this through the lens of our current year, what stands out?
Well, the author states that humanity is emerging from the thraldom of matter.
Okay.
He says that in such cases, destruction parallels the impact of the descending spirit upon opposing matter.
That makes me think about all the chaos and disruption we're seeing globally. Could it be that we're experiencing this destruction as part of a larger shift towards a more spiritual way of being?
It's certainly possible, and remember, he also talks about a future shining with an added glory.
Right.
It's not all doom and gloom.
Definitely. But amidst all this talk of a glorious future,
Yeah.
he also predicts some pretty wild stuff.
Uh-huh.
He mentions a discovery related to the use of light by the power of thought.
Right.
And the time frame for that lined up perfectly with right now, 2025.
It does. He talks about instruments hitherto undreamed of, but really quite possible.
Wow.
So sensitive they can be set in motion by the power of the human eye under the focused direction of thought.
Wow, that sounds like something out of science fiction.
Yeah.
But are there any real-world hints that we're getting close to that kind of technology?
Think about the advancements in biophotonics,
Okay.
which studies how light interacts with living organisms.
Right.
We're already seeing incredible breakthroughs in how light can be used for healing and communication.
So we might be on the verge of a major leap forward in our understanding of consciousness and subtle energies.
It's certainly a tantalizing possibility.
Yeah.
He even mentions the potential for tangible rapport with the spirit world, which would be a game changer.
Now, that would be incredible.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where we could communicate directly with those who have passed on.
Right.
But if these predictions are accurate, why haven't we seen more evidence of these advancements?
The author suggests that widespread recognition of these truths
Okay.
depends on inner growth and illumination.
Okay.
It's not just about scientific breakthroughs. It's about a shift in human consciousness.
So it's like we need to collectively raise our vibration to be able to perceive and utilize these advancements.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the new group of world servers.
Okay.
Maybe they're playing a role in ushering in this new age of spiritual awareness, laying the groundwork for these profound changes to manifest.
But if they're so influential,
Yeah.
why don't we know more about them? Why operate so subtly?
Remember, they're a largely subjective group,
Okay.
connected through telepathy and a shared purpose.
Right.
Maybe this subtle approach is necessary to avoid triggering resistance from those who aren't ready to embrace these ideas.
Makes sense. Planting seeds of change requires a gentle touch. But it also makes you wonder, if we're all part of this divine plan, do our individual choices even matter?
That's a question worth pondering and one we'll explore further as we continue this deep dive. But for now, what are your thoughts on the role of free will within a grand cosmic plan? Does it feel paradoxical, or is there a way to reconcile those two ideas?
Honestly, I'm still wrestling with that.
Yeah.
On one hand, it's comforting to think there's a bigger purpose unfolding.
Right.
But on the other, I want to believe my choices have meaning, that I'm not just a pawn in some cosmic game.
That's a valid feeling.
Yeah.
And I think the author would agree that our choices do matter, even within a larger framework.
Okay.
He talks about the importance of aligning our will with the divine will, becoming conscious participants in the unfolding of the plan.
So it's less about being controlled by the plan and more about becoming aware of it and choosing to cooperate with it.
Exactly. It's about moving from a sense of being acted upon to a sense of acting in alignment with.
Right.
And that, I think, is where the real power lies.
It's fascinating to think about the interplay between free will and a divine plan. Like, are we truly making choices, or are we just playing out a predetermined script?
It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and theologians for centuries, but within this esoteric framework, the emphasis seems to be on aligning our will with the divine will. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose, but our choices have a ripple effect, influencing the unfolding of the plan.
So it's like we're all co-creating the future, both individually and collectively.
Exactly, and that's where discernment comes in.
Okay.
The author talks about the importance of cultivating discernment, of learning to distinguish between genuine spiritual insight and the illusions of the lower mind.
Yeah, with all these esoteric concepts swelling around, it's easy to get lost in the weeds. How do we develop that kind of discernment? How do we know if what we're experiencing is real or just wishful thinking?
It's a critical skill to develop on the spiritual path,
Right.
and the author repeatedly emphasizes the importance of meditation.
Okay.
It's about quieting the mind and accessing the deeper levels of our being.
I've tried meditation, but my mind is like a wild monkey swinging from thought to thought.
Yeah.
It's hard to find that stillness.
It definitely takes practice.
Yeah.
But as we cultivate that inner stillness,
Mm-hmm.
we create space for the voice of the soul to emerge,
Right.
for the light of intuition to shine through.
Oh,
It's like clearing a path in the mental jungle to allow for those deeper insights to take root.
I love that analogy. So as we become more adept at quieting the mind, we become more attuned to our intuition.
Precisely.
Mhm.
And remember our earlier discussion about the limitations of words.
Yeah.
Maybe meditation is a way to bypass those limitations and tap into a more direct form of knowing,
Okay.
a language beyond words.
It's like we're tuning into a different frequency, one that vibrates at a higher level than our everyday language.
Right.
And as we attune ourselves to that higher frequency, maybe we become more receptive to the guidance of the masters and the subtle workings of the divine plan.
I think you're right on the mark. It's about cultivating a sensitivity to those subtle whispers of the soul, the intuitive nudges that guide us towards truth and wisdom.
It's incredible to think about all the layers we've uncovered in this deep dive, the inner light, the limitations of words, the roles of masters and disciples, this mysterious new group of world servers, prophecies for the future, the paths of the occultist and the mystic, and the importance of cultivating discernment.
And we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
Right.
But the real work begins when we take these concepts beyond intellectual understanding and allow them to inform our lives. It's about putting these ideas into practice, allowing them to shape our choices and actions.
So what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing we want them to hold on to from this deep dive?
If we connect all this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
I think the key takeaway is this. We are all part of something much greater than ourselves. A grand cosmic unfolding, guided by a divine plan. And we each have a role to play in this unfolding, no matter how big or small.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive observers in this grand play of life. We are active participants, co-creators of our individual and collective destinies, and that's a pretty empowering thought.
Absolutely. And as we cultivate our inner light,
Right.
refine our spiritual vehicles, and dedicate ourselves to service, we contribute to the upliftment of humanity and the realization of the divine plan.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for joining me on this journey of exploration.
The pleasure was all mine. And as a final thought to leave our listeners with,
Okay.
I'd like to pose this question.
Okay.
If the limitations of words are so significant in conveying spiritual truths,
Yeah.
what other ways might we access this knowledge? Could direct experience, intuition, and perhaps even the development of psychic abilities play a role in unlocking deeper levels of understanding?
That's a great question to ponder, something for all of us to consider as we continue our own journeys of spiritual discovery.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and until next time, keep diving deep.